Welcome to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. Do you wish you had more energy, better relationships, and a more meaningful life? Do you sometimes have a sense of unshakable unhappiness? Well, in this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Adam Dorsay, a psychologist and executive coach in Silicon Valley, where he works with executives, entrepreneurs, professional athletes. He's also the host of Psyched, an award-winning podcast, and he's just written a new book, Super Psyched, Unleash the Power of the 4 Types of Connection and Live the Life You Love. Welcome, Adam.
Oh, Philip, it's so great to be with you.
Thank you. Well, thanks for coming on. So I'm going to hand over to you. Tell us about your background and, the work in psychotherapy.
Absolutely. Well, I kind of came to it knowing from a very young age that I wanted to do it, but I had imposter syndrome from a very young age. That came to me quite honestly. I was in special education. I had dyslexia. At the time, they did not have the tools to really diagnose the fact that I had the inattentive type of ADHD. So I wasn't swinging from the chandelier like Shia talks about, or Sia, I should say. I was instead looking out the window and thinking about squirrels, which are great, except they don't get you to pass your classes. So I came into the profession rather late. I worked for years in the corporate industry in the US and Japan. And I ended up marrying a psychologist, and every day she and I would have dinner together and she'd tell me about her day. And I would think to myself, that was the day I was supposed to have. And not only was she a psychologist, but she is the best person I've ever known. And she said, you got to do it. You only live once. I don't care what it takes, because she and I both knew it would be a very strong uphill battle, especially at that stage in life with a house, a baby, and another one probably coming not so far away. So I bit the bullet, took my classes nights and weekends while I kept my day job. And then one day when I earned my doctorate and needed to earn my 3,000 hours for licensure, I quit, got rid of all those lovely benefits, made $10 an hour for 2 years while I was earning my hours. And as I was telling you, during my pre-license days, I worked with adolescent males and women. And something magical happened when I got a license and what do they call those? A plaque on my door. Essentially, a shingle is what I was looking for. When I got a shingle, it was just a parade of high-functioning, high-achieving men who wanted to talk to a guy who knew the ropes, who had been there, who had done that. And I was shocked. Initially, I thought, wow, will I be able to work well with men? And the answer was a resounding yes. It was like a fish to water. It was so organic. And I love working with men. 85% of my clients are men. And I came to do a TEDx talk on men and emotions. Of course, when I was telling people I was doing a TEDx talk on men and emotions, people would laugh and say, do they have those? And I said, of course they do. It's just that they are not able to name those. There's a very heavy term that many listeners will love saying at cocktail parties because you will immediately sound smart. It's alexithymia. Alexithymia is the inability, lexi, word, thymia, feeling, the inability to put words to feelings, which can be one of the most horrifying of experiences. I know I'm feeling bad. I just can't exactly name the thing. It's almost like I can't get this rock out of my shoe, no matter how I try. So that's one of the things I do most with men is help them put words to their emotional experiences and figure out how to best utilize and leverage the data from their emotions. I do a lot of resiliency work. I created a program for Facebook for 4 years, went international, to help them reduce vicarious trauma. And, I love that work. I'm currently doing that with DigitalOcean and their trust and safety team. So anyway, that's a little about me.
So that word you just said that I've instantly forgotten, where men have difficulty articulating their feelings. Why is that? What's the cause? Why are men so bad at that?
Philip, you're not going to believe this. This is a freaking bombshell. Boys, when they are in the wild, kind of just new to the world, they are more emotionally expressive than their female counterparts. But it's my contention that they become socialized to blunt those emotions. It's almost like a sledgehammer is put to the emotions. We're told to man up, don't cry like a girl, insert some homophobic term here and say, don't be like that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When I was a boy, there were 3 prototypes that I can think of anyway, that I was allowed to be. I was allowed to be like John Wayne, kind of the strong, silent type. I was allowed to be like Joe Montana. He was our quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers. I'm sure, insert incredible football star in England, perhaps David Beckham. Or you could be like James Bond. These were the 3 options that I was aware of. Oh, you could also maybe be a rock star. You could be a rock star. I was none of those things. So, like, for the rest of us muggles, where do we go? And that was very flummoxing. So you ask, how do we unlearn to connect with our emotions? Well, we're told who we're supposed to be. Well, those don't fit. I mean, I'm using a lot of shoe analogies because I love shoe analogies. But if I was to tell you to wear shoes that were 2 sizes too small or 5 sizes too big and like run a marathon, not great. Not great. And that's essentially how we go through life. And so, of course, we're out of sync with our emotions. And people will say, when you say you're feeling something, no, they'll say, no, you're not feeling that. Or don't feel that way. Or we are mirrored in some way that just causes us to miss the mark. And one of the great things about psychotherapy is we are trained to really track emotions and to name those emotions and to help the person explore those emotions and find the richness of the data. Oh my gosh. I never wanted to be an accountant. I always wanted to go into, marketing. It's like, wow, that kind of happened to Chandler Bing on Friends. He was in charge of the weenus. He was an accountant. I think that was what Chandler did. And then he went into marketing and advertising. It was a really bold move. It was something that would not have been done by previous generations. Usually, I'm a banker and I will die a banker. I will not switch. That was not done. And these days, by following our emotions and finding the richness in the data, just the way I did, we can actually claim, we can name and I know it sounds kind of corny to rhyme it, but we can name and claim our lives.
And what are the consequences that you saw then? You saw in these men that were coming to see you of not being able to, identify with perhaps, a role model, or just living lives that perhaps they didn't want to live, professionally.
Love that question. So, Philip, you took the bold move to be a creator. You have a podcast. I know you're doing other things. And one of my big maxims is create more, consume less. What ends up happening to men who don't follow their paths? They become consumers. They basically surf the sports channels or the news channels and become, quote, passionate about that, when in fact they might be far more passionate about their relationships. But relationships are scary and they don't have the tools to deal with those. But watching sports and talking with sports over beers with bros, very safe. Talking with your wife about a complex issue, not so safe. And one of the things that we need to be able to do is have the tools to have those seemingly unsafe conversations, because paradoxically, it's way less safe to not have those conversations and to have basically an unspoken elephant in the room all the time that both are aware of, but neither is naming because they don't know how to name. They haven't been given those tools. They haven't been able to name their emotions in a non-blaming way, a non-shaming way, in a way that we own them and say, wow, I'm noticing I'm feeling this way when this happens. And let's create some time uninterrupted where we can safely unpack this. And there are many, many techniques of doing this. I like thinking of it as PPE. We call it in the United States. That's personal protective equipment. Like when you're in the chemistry lab, you wear a smock, you wear goggles and gloves. And we need the rough equivalent of those tools when we're handling our own combustible emotions or the combustible emotions of another. But we're not taught that. I know you learned maths, and I love saying maths because we call it math over here. But, and whenever I'm with somebody from England, I just get so happy, by the way. I love the linguistic differences. And I'm absolutely in love, by the way, with the UK. I'm one of these guys who just, the music, the beer, the beautiful scenery, and of course the literature. My God, so good. Anyway, so
we call it PPE as well, and that's great to hear. And
Do you call it
we
PPE?
bonded over English music earlier. So
I made it over the
I
pond.
know you're a fan. So what? Just coming back to the how these how this might manifest in men. I mean, people listening to this, does it manifest in mental health issues or even mental illness? I mean, I'm assuming if you don't tackle these sorts of challenges, you can end up with severe depression, for example.
Absolutely. Depression and anxiety are big ones. The depression comes about when we feel hopeless. We learn to not trust ourselves, and we think it'll never work out. There is no future, thank you. Johnny Rotten, no future. There is no future. With anxiety, it's the byproduct of avoidance. If you look at almost any form of anxiety, within it is a component of avoidance. And the paradox is the more we approach the thing that we need to approach to reduce our anxiety, the less anxiety will feel. But it's terrifying to approach those things. We'd prefer to avoid it. And if we go a little bit back in time and look at it under a microscope and its nascent phase, what we see is there's a moment where the guy doesn't pay. This is just one of the ways it could happen. The guy feels something, doesn't listen, says, it'll be all right. Not convenient to pay attention to it, not convenient to name it. I'm just going to carry on. Sometimes that's okay. We can't do this for all things, but sometimes, like in the context of a love relationship, we lean into hope. We say, I hope it'll get better. I hope it will get better. You know what? She wants to have children. I feel a little bit pressured. It's less comfortable to say no. You know what? I hope it'll be okay. In fact, maybe when we have a child, things will get better. By the way, that has never worked in history. Throw a child into a situation that is already not very well structured. So we use hope as a strategy, and we use denial as a strategy. And denial is a good short-term strategy. Any of you who have done a cold plunge, if you're going to think about everything you're about to do when you're jumping in that cold water, not a great strategy, because you're going to feel everything. You kind of need a little bit of that denial. If you're about to receive some bad news, it's almost like temporary armor to let the news come in a little bit more slowly. So denial is not terrible for all things. It's an okay short-term coping strategy, but it's not a good long-term one. What we see with long-term denial is people self-medicating, whether it's retail therapy, drugs and alcohol, sex, and going outside the marriage because it's too inconvenient to talk about things. Virtually every affair, if you look at it, it's a conversation not had between the couple. Oftentimes, the conversation would have kept the affair from happening, or might have, in this day and age, might have lent itself to perhaps a more open relationship, which personally I've actually not seen work. I hear a lot of evidence of polyamory working. I haven't seen it myself, but I'm open to hearing about that, and that would be. But I do know it's a rising trend amongst young people. So not attending to our emotions, it's seems almost innocent when it first occurs. Oh, I'm not going to pay attention to this. It'll be fine. And then it grows like a big oak tree.
And do you help people then? Because this doesn't sound like, that you're in touch with who you actually are, with your actual identity. Do you have to kind of take people back to, roots, if you like, and break them down to break them up? Is that the kind of concept?
It's not a one size fits all. It was really funny. I was watching Shrinking. I'm almost done with the second season. And the Harrison Ford character, whose name is Paul on the show, he's asked by a student in graduate school, which is better, CBT or humanistic therapy? And he says CBT. And that's patently untrue. CBT is amazing. I love it. magnificent technology, and it works like a charm for the people for whom it works, for the things for which it works. But to make a blanket statement saying, is this how things are done? It's each person needs a different approach. And the therapy, to borrow from Irv Yalom, who's one of the most important contributors to the evolution of psychotherapy itself, a Stanford psychiatrist, he says that every person who comes through the door in his office, or did, he's now retired, he would recreate the therapy. It would be reinvented. So if you, Philip, were my client, which you are not, for a host of reasons, that would not be correct. But if you were, it would be a unique Philip and Adam co-created therapy based on my knowing you and what you needed. It might include some breaking down. Oftentimes we do break down what are called defenses and take a look at those defenses, because those defenses have helped you along the way. But very similar to, wearing, when I wore, going back to the shoes, there was a time when I was a size, I'm going to use English, I'm going to use European. There was a time when I was a size 41. I'm presently a size 47. A 41, it served me for a minute. I needed it for that phase in my life during that kind of David Bowie changes moment when I was Ziggy, so to speak. But I'm not meant to be Ziggy Stardust for the rest of my life when I'm raising children. So I need to grow into my size 47. So at times, yeah, it's like we look at those shoes and say, wow, how are you moving in those? Are they still working for you? They are not. Oh my gosh, look at that. What do we need instead? What do you need to create so that your life will be by your design and serving you better? And there has never been a one size fits all. It's each time it's a phenomenon that has never existed exactly like it before. That's why I think manualized therapy is not well advised. You can borrow from some manual, but if you follow it like a cookbook and trying to make a chocolate cake, the end product will not be a happier Philip in my experience.
So I guess, this term unshakable unhappiness that you refer to, I guess that's also very personalized. That's an individual cause this unshakable unhappiness. So how do you go about, without going into, detail of how you would work with a client, how do you go about taking somebody and, helping them have a happier life?
Again, individual, but I'm going to give you a couple of things. First of all, I share the research. One of the things my guys in Silicon Valley love is a little bit of context to know that, hey, this is research based. This is not just me saying, I have a little, according to your chart, you have a moon rising here. And I'm not bashing that. That's perhaps, helpful to some. That's not what psychotherapy is or should be. But one of the things I do is I first might share Dr. Sonia Lyubomirsky's work on the happiness chart, the pie, in which, if you can imagine, there are three sectors. One is bisected. So the circle has 50% for one thing, 10% for another, and 40% for the last. All right? As it turns out, you and I were both born with what's called a happiness set point. We were born on the happier side of the bed, or perhaps the more grumpy side of the bed. Imagine Slugs McPherson, a little bit happier, Sid Vicious, maybe less happy. We can grow these though. And we think that our circumstances are what determines our happiness. Turns out about 10% of our happiness is attributable to our actual circumstances. And the other 40% part of the pie, and this is what's so promising, is our intentional efforts. And there are things that we can do that have not just been, coming out of intuition. Once again, there are researched ideas. Improving gratitude has been shown to be a very fast way, unless you have an eye roll when you're engaging in the gratitude exercise. By the way, if you eye roll when you're doing a gratitude exercise, it will actually be bad for you. Instead, you can override what's called the negativity bias. The negativity bias is this thing that helped us survive throughout the millennia. but now causes us more harm than good. You go on a vacation, 99 things that were great happen and one really crummy thing happened. And the only thing that we remember is what? The crummy thing. And the 99 things seem nearly erased. That's the negativity bias at play. And one of the things that we need to do, and I'm using a techie term, but we have to hit Control-Alt-Delete, essentially, if you remember that function on the keyboard, to override the system's defaults. And that's one of the things I do with my guys is say, all right, let's look for what also happened. In addition to that horribly crappy thing, what else happened? And we do an inventory, and lo and behold, dozens of things emerge. You know, I had a great dinner with my wife on this thing. My kids had a blast going down the water slide. We went up a mountain and we got to the top and took a photo. Oh, yeah. And okay, so we spent 2 hours on the tarmac after the vacation. And by the way, that's called recency bias. Like the last thing that happened often weighs very heavily. Primacy is the first thing that happened. And recency is, those are the two things that we tend to remember the most. But one of the things I do is I let them know, hey, between your ears is this thing, and it's doing all kinds of things to you. It's called the brain, and it's at times serving you and at times really messing up your life. And let's, reduce the harmful effects of the things that disconnect you from life. That's why I wrote about connection, and increase its potential prowess to connect you more with life by looking at, as I was mentioning, the good things, the gratitude, a host of other things that we can do in positive psychology. I'm so grateful to Martin Seligman and Christopher Peterson, who were the fathers of this just breakthrough in psychology. Previously, we were considered clinical success getting somebody just a neutral. I don't know about you, but I do not want to have a neutral life. I want to get north of neutral. And that's what these tools can allow. And again, not a one size fits all. Sometimes I'll use a tool that has worked with everybody, and then I meet a guy and it doesn't work at all with him. And I have to be very, very attentive and get into my toolbox, try something else. Get into my toolbox, try something else. One of the other things we can do, courtesy of CBT, which I was saying was not the best, but it's a definite, it's like saying, is a Phillips screwdriver, no pun intended, is a Phillips screwdriver the best tool that has ever existed? It's not. But nothing can do it like a Phillips screwdriver. CBT, we look at our thoughts and how they're influencing our feelings and our behaviors. And by really leaning into those thoughts, known as oftentimes cognitive distortions, where it was all bad or it was all good, we know that that's bogus. Nothing is all bad or very few things are all bad or all good. Most things, are non-binary. Like, okay, they have that. There was something good within this catastrophe, including the fact that my wife and I hugged each other and we're a more solid couple as a result of this so-called catastrophe. That might be one of the ways that we look at it. Anyway, that's what comes to mind, Philip.
Tell us more about about connections, about the importance of connections.
So I've done approximately 20,000 hours of psychotherapy. I've had nearly 250 episodes of interviews on my own podcast. I've read a lot of books, and throughout all of these seemingly disparate things, my therapy that I've conducted, the podcasts, the books I've read, this word connection has been the common denominator. It's been a linchpin for everything. There's been one small problem. In spite of the fact that everybody says, oh, what I want more than anything is connection, has it really been defined? I have not seen a book that really defines connection, especially in the 4 ways that we humans tend to experience it. So my book attempted to do that. I consulted 10 other licensed mental health practitioners, came up with a working definition for connection itself, because connection appears to be the precursor to all the things that we want. And think about it for a second. Disconnection is at the heart of virtually every psychological illness that is described in the DSM. When we are depressed, we're disconnected from the present because we're thinking about the past. When we are anxious, we're disconnected from the present because we're thinking about the future. When we're in a traumatic state, we may dissociate or depersonalize. We're not really here. And certainly psychosis is a break from reality itself. So if disconnection is at the heart of everything we don't want and connection is at the heart of everything we do want, why hasn't anybody written a book on just that topic? And so that's what I did. We connect in 4 ways. We connect with ourselves. And if you can imagine ripples of circles going outwards, our self is the primary connection. It informs all other connections. And it is not selfish. It is not narcissistic to focus on yourself. I cannot focus on my wife unless I know where I'm coming from. Now, there are times when I have to just kind of, if there's a crisis and like, oh my God, you got to pick up the kids. I'm like, honey, I'm really needing some time for myself. No, I'm going to get in the car and pick up my kids. And maybe put on some good music along the way. Maybe that's how I'll do to myself. But what I'm talking about, of course, kidding aside, and semi-seriousness aside, then you can think about this yourself. Let's imagine you're at a lecture and you've been going to the bathroom until the break, and you're walking towards the bathroom. You got to pee so bad. Like you had to pee badly 15 minutes ago. And one of your old college buddies says, hey, so good to see you. Let's catch up right now. And you're just like, oh, well, that's a metaphor for how we are when we're not in touch with ourselves. When we got to pee really badly, we're not really available. And yet many of us go through life in that state. I'm not saying that they have some urinary problem, but I'm using it once again as a metaphor. We are not available to others when we're not connected with ourselves. All right. So it goes out. Then it's connecting with others. Connecting with others could be connecting with my wife, who I consider my most important external connection. And my children, connecting with you is another. And connecting with my pets. I've actually included pets these days, particularly because we now know the pet-human connection is so good for our mental health. I mean, the preponderance of evidence that supports having a pet for those of us who love pets. My dad does not need a pet, by the way. He actually would not like to have a pet and could go through several lifetimes not touching one. I'll tell you about that in a second. But then comes connecting with the world. The world includes our work. It includes art, includes nature, it includes our ancestry. These are also very important things to connect with. And then the fourth realm is connecting with something greater. Now, for some people, that does mean going to church on Sundays and traditional religion. For many people, particularly in Silicon Valley, the orthodox atheists, even they will experience something greater when they go to Stonehenge, when they go to Grand Canyon, when they go see Mount Kilimanjaro. They will experience something greater than themselves, and they may experience awe. There's been a lot of research on awe, and it's a spiritual experience. What we found is that when our brains are in an awestruck state, and we've seen this under neuroimaging, the same receptors that take in psilocybin, which is the psychoactive component of magic mushrooms, come alive. They go online. People become less self-conscious. People become more other-centered. So awe and connecting with something greater is a really, really powerful part of the human experience. And Philip, I would contend that you and me connecting right now are creating something greater than me or you alone. Me just talking with myself, it's fine. But you and me together create something exponentially more powerful by the fact that you're causing evocative questions and causing me to show up in a different way.
And hopefully the output is then shared by many, many people. So there's an additional benefit. So that's really interesting, the 4 types of connection. So it sounds like, and I guess this is where you help and where the book helps. It sounds like though you have to be in a pretty good place in order to understand and be able to, enable yourself to have those 4 connections and spend time on each of them. So especially when you're in your midlife, you've got the pressures of perhaps a family, you've got work pressures, you might even have pressures of your elderly relatives. And there's little time for yourself. And I think a lot of guys will relate to that. And traditionally, and you've talked about this already, it's not selfish, but some people think it is selfish to kind of put their own needs before anybody else, before all those other dependents. So how do guys go about, just starting to be in a place where they can start to look at these 4 connections and work out how to better manage them?
There are many starting points, many ways to leave the Shire and go into perhaps immediate discomfort, but ultimately, your hero's journey as it relates to connection. One of the places I might start is noticing how you speak to yourself. Let's say we have 6,000 thoughts per day. Some neuroscientists estimate up to 60. And many of them are the same thoughts that we had yesterday, so not all that interesting. And many of them are actually self-harmful. In fact, if we spoke to others the way we speak to ourselves, we'd have no friends. And one of the things, and you and I both know, I believe, I'm being presumptuous when I say this, is that we can only love others as much as we love ourselves. We are a limiting factor. If we hate ourselves but love someone else, that love will not be quite as good. Bill Sykes could only love Nancy so much. I think that was her name from Oliver. But he was kind of rotten to the core, but he loved Nancy and he killed her and killed himself. I think that's how it goes. Lovely. Anywho, I'm not suggesting that things are all that dramatic, but self-compassion has been studied just on a grand scale. When you first hear the term self-compassion, if you're not familiar with it, you might roll your eyes and say, oh my gosh, that sounds like California, like granola crap. It's not. The Navy SEALs, which are our most badass military dudes in the United States, use it and they get better and faster results. So if you can imagine yourself, you've lost your wallet. You ask yourself, how could I be such an idiot? Could I be, to borrow from Chandler Ring, could I be a bigger idiot? It goes into your head's Google search bar. How could I be such an idiot? You will yield hundreds of results of you being an idiot throughout time. And boy, the gag reel does not feel good to look at. And it doesn't get you closer to the wallet that you lost. Excuse me. But if you were to instead speak to yourself the way you would speak to a friend and say, hey, what would be a better question? Oh, better question might be, where did you see it last? Who else could I ask? Can I retrace my steps? There are a host of other questions. This literally happened to me. Now, I'm the king, by the way, of berating myself. I grew up in an era where it seemed lionized the lyrics of Morrissey really informed a lot of the way I think. And I'm here to tell you, Morrissey, a lot of fun to listen to, but maybe not the best OS for your brain. Does not make us much happier. He expresses some beautiful poetry, but maybe not a way to live life. Ask me why and I'll spit in your eye. Okay, sorry, couldn't resist. That's one of his lines.
It's not the cheeriest approach to life, is it?
Yeah, it's not exactly. Yeah, that was one of Morrissey's lines. Ask me why and I'll spit in your eye. Anyway, instead, what I did when I lost my wallet, yes, my knee jerk was I did blast myself like, oh my gosh, idiot. And then I thought to myself, no, use the technology that, comes from Kristen Neff and Chris Germer out of Harvard. He's amazing. Been on my podcast, love his work. And so I asked myself, who could I ask? How can I trust myself? I looked at my calendar and where I'd been the last few days. And interestingly, I remembered, even though it wasn't on my calendar, it was almost like I was going to a Sherlock Holmes like memory castle. I remembered I'd gone to the tailor 2 days ago. I called the tailor. Hey, did I leave my wallet in my pants? And she said, yeah, it's here. And my second thought was, well, why didn't you call me? But okay. Then I said, thank you so much. I drove over, got my wallet. But that's a seemingly silly, but a really, really if you allow yourself to think about it, it's a rather profound way for us to be in relationships with ourselves. We'll get much better and much faster results if we can speak to ourselves in a kind way, the way we would speak to a friend. That is one of the 3 ways self-compassion unfolds. I won't go to the other 2 because that's a whole other conversation. But if we can speak to ourselves the way we speak to a friend, already we're in much better relationship with ourselves. It clears so many cobwebs.
So just be more kind to yourself.
Be more kind, be more thoughtful, be more intelligent with yourself. I mean, speak to yourself the way, a kind Obi-Wan Kenobi would speak to you.
And what about if you, you were saying, the way that you see yourself and treat yourself is the way that you can then treat others, or you probably can't truly love others until you learn to really love yourself. I mean, how do you do that if you're not in love with yourself, if you are feeling depressed, or, there are just things in your life you just feel insurmountable, like something like just your job. You may hate your job. You may be 55 years old and you think, I've got another, at least 10 years of doing this. I'd feel so unfulfilled. And that flows down to actually liking yourself. I mean, how do you kind of start with that?
One of the things I like doing is getting people in touch with their strengths. There are empirically validated, researched, actually 24 of them. They could be called character strengths or values in action, things like curiosity. Now, let's say this 55-year-old hates his job. And let's say that, unlike me, he did not have the privilege of being able to leave his job. What I would ask him to do is take an inventory and find out what are his top 5 character strengths. Could be something like curiosity. It could be something like judgment, leadership. I'd find out what his top 5 are. And I'd ask him to employ. And by the way, it feels really good when you see what your top strengths are. Like, oh yeah. And when you read about them, you feel a little bit better. You feel like, oh, and they're not sugar coated. It's not like some type of saccharin. It's, oh yeah, that is actually who I am. These are true. I would try to find him a creative way to deploy one or more of those strengths at his current job that he might not be doing. There's an old story. Well, actually, I'll tell my story. I came back from Japan. I lived in Japan for a number of years. And when I was in my first round of graduate school, my 20s, from which I ultimately would disembark and then return, the whole story, you can, it's written about in my book. I was relegated to bank teller. I was a college educated person, and a bank teller in the US is often treated like a human ATM. Are they called ATMs out in England?
Now, yes. Yeah.
Now they're called ATMs. I had a feeling there was a different
hole in the wall.
A hole in the wall, right. So I was treated like a human or a meat-based hole in the wall. People would speak to me almost like just not hello, just, cash this check, deposit this here. And I was reading Viktor Frankl's book on Man's Search for Meaning at the time, and I didn't know about the technology of character strengths, but I realized that I could find a way to make it meaningful because he had made something infinitely harder than what I was experiencing. He would have killed to be a bank teller, rather than be in Auschwitz, nearly dying with all of his friends and family, his profession, his name, everything he owned taken away. And I decided to ask myself, how do I make this seemingly dumb experience meaningful? Well, I see 120 people a day. I want to be a psychologist someday. And there are 120 very different types of people. There may be a soccer mom. We call it soccer out here. Sorry, folks. Although I was told it was originally called soccer somewhere. Anyway, we won't get into that one. It might be a judge or a professional. It might be somebody who's very new to the country and barely speaks the language. It could be a college student, could be someone who's unhoused. You never know who it's going to be. But I asked myself, I see 120 people. Can I connect with 119 of them and make them smile, if not laugh? Can I do that? I gave myself a challenge. So to that fifth end, what ended up happening was my shifts went by. I had 8-hour shifts that I dreaded going to. They felt like 2 hours. I was in flow. I was loving it. And people would purposely say, I want to talk to that guy because he's the one who makes me smile and laugh. So people would actually purposely, not see one of my colleagues just to see me because I was the funny one. And what ended up happening was it became a training ground for me to connect with people of all walks of life, which would serve me really well in the future. So even though I was not stoked to be a bank teller, it ended up being one of the best training grounds of my life because I just flipped the script. I became the funny bank teller. And of course, I made sure I would balance at the end of the day. If my drawer did not, that would be a problem. But that's what I would do with this 55-year-old is find a way to, and it was interpersonal intelligence was that trait that I was rocking there. But I would ask him to use one of those character strengths in some novel way at his job, and he would find himself feeling happier. I might also ask him if there is a way out, if there is something else that he'd rather do that wouldn't cause too much disruption to his life. And if he had, and we would go through a very thorough analysis of how viable that was or how viable that was not. But I would be at his side as we try to figure out ways for him to at least enjoy that job more, for him to enjoy various aspects of his life more. I would surmise that, like many people, he spends 2 hours a day on social media comparing his life to others. I would surmise that he mindlessly watches, sports news or news at home and doesn't actually find it all that fulfilling. And I would go through an inventory of his life and say, how connected are you with the things you're doing? Are these really feeding you, or are they just kind of numbing you out and making you further distant from life itself? So we would go through a fairly thorough analysis of like how he's allocating that one thing that he can't get back, that thing called time. We can lose our health and get it back. We can lose our money and get it back. We can't lose our time and get it back. And let's find out how he's doing that. And one of the things that I talk about in my book is each of us has a unique connection formula, the things that make you feel connected and come alive. And by the way, the definition, it's 2 pages, but it's what makes you come alive. It's what brings vitality, life force. You know it when you got it. Like the very first time I heard Rush Moving Pictures, I turned it on and Tom Sawyer, I was just like, I knew that something in my body had changed forever. And every time I hear that to this day, all these years later, because I was only like 13 at the time, I still feel that. And I know a lot of people do. I could not get through a day without touching an animal. I love being with my pets. My father, as I mentioned, his connection formula has nothing to do with pets. Part of his connection formula, by the way, is going to operas all the time. And he can sit through a 6-hour Wagnerian opera. For me, that would be a very expensive place to sleep. That's not part of my connection formula. I can do like a 2-hour, 3-hour, but 6 hours of Wagner, forget it. And one of the things that we also do is we sometimes pretend that we love something because we're told we should love that thing.
What's really interesting is that these are quite easy to do, aren't they? Your example of when you're a bank teller and you made a decision to try and make people laugh and connect to people. That's not something, you didn't have to pay any money to do that. You didn't have to spend months preparing for that. It was a fairly easy decision for you to make. And yet, from what you're saying, that could really start you down a path towards happiness, just by making those small changes.
I might even say it's a simple thing to do, but it's not easy. Simple, but not easy, because there are things that are ostensibly easy or simple, but we don't do them. There's a chasm between what we know and what we do. There's a chasm between common sense and common practice. I know I should do this. I'll get around to it someday. We procrastinate, partially because we worry that when we do it, it might not work. And what then? Then I'll be really crestfallen. But I always say, put it into play, see how it goes. And if it doesn't work, we can always, alter course and try something else.
And when you talked about these 4 levels of connection that kind of start inside you and then work their way outwards, kind of micro through to macro. Do you kind of need to get that first one fixed first, first one sorted first? Do you need to look inside first, and then should the other 3 connections follow? Your personal connections, and then with the wider world, etc. And then these kind of feelings of awe. Is it a kind of sequence?
I wouldn't say it's a sequence, actually, because there are people, particularly on the spectrum, who are not as interested in their interpersonal connections. They're more interested in the things they're interested in, oftentimes, reptiles or Nordic gods, or studying the things that they get really passionate about. So they might be more interested in connecting with the world, connecting with their jobs. But at some point, people need people. And I would say that the sequence after connecting with self would be optional. Like some people are more compelled to say, you know what I need to do before I even venture out to connect with people, I need to go on, a 3-week sojourn throughout the mountains. So I would really, really ask people to check in with themselves to see what's next, and to challenge themselves, particularly around the things that they might feel awkward with. Some people say, well, I'm not such a people person. Well, be willing to suck for a while. Learning a foreign language is a great example of like one of the things that, we only live this one time. We only live once. And the thing we regret on our deathbed is not trying things. With that in mind, we have to be willing to suck at a thing. I went to a 5-college campus, and one of the colleges had really, really smart kids, like self-identified as smart. It was Pomona College. And that was where I took my Japanese. I went to Pitzer, which was a less smart college, so to speak, according to its ranking in that day, although Pitzer has risen quite a bit. So I go over to Pomona College with 120 students to study Japanese. And at the end of 2 years, there were 12 of us. There was about a 90% attrition to my recollection. And I believe that it was because they were not willing, the other 108 of them were not willing to look stupid. Because that is a prerequisite to learning a foreign language. You have to be willing to look really stupid for a while. I was willing to pay the price of looking stupid. But there are things that I'm not willing to look stupid around. And some people are not willing to look stupid as they try to become more facile in interacting with others. And that inhibits them. And then they live half-lived lives and they regret it on their deathbed. I wish I'd tried more. So I don't want those regrets.
So kind of in summary, Adam, then, if you are listening to this podcast episode and, this is really resonating with you, you want to shake this unshakable unhappiness. What are the, and we've talked a lot about this, but what general advice would you say? Start here.
There are a host of ways of doing this, but one thing I like to do is imagine your next large birthday. What do you wish will be in your life at that time? Because there's almost no doubt that it's going to be requiring courage and vulnerability to get there, whatever it might be. I want to write my first book. I can tell you from firsthand experience, it requires a lot of vulnerability, a lot of frustration tolerance, It might be that I want to get that degree. It might be that I want to go, do that physical feat. No matter what it will be, the payment to the gods is high, and it will have been worth it. So that first thing I would do is probably imagine, what do I want to grow in the next, whatever number of years? That would be one of the first places I would go. There are so many other questions I would ask during, say, a 50-minute intake. But that would be one of my top answers.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Adam. If people listening want to listen to your podcast, and your TEDx talks, and your book, where do they find them?
I'm so glad you asked, Philip. It would be, DrAdamDorsay.com is my website. It's got all the things, maybe too many things. DrAdamDorsay, like the museum in France, just without the apostrophe. And let's see, what else have I got? The TEDx talks are both available on YouTube. Just put my name, Adam Dorsay, in, and you'll see one it's called Emotions, the Data Men Miss, or the Data Men Miss, depending on how you pronounce it. And the other is about friendship and adulthood, a topic over which I've taken tremendous interest, especially in this age of loneliness where people have fewer friends and greater amounts of loneliness, which is so toxic to our health. My book is available on Amazon. I hope it's available on Amazon in UK, but I'm not sure. But you just put my name, Adam Dorsay, in the search bar, and it should be there. It's only been out for 2 months, but it's been very well rated and has a lot of great people who you probably know and like endorsing it. My podcast, all platforms. Although the book is called Super Psyched with 2 words, the podcast is Super Psyched with 1 word and 2 capital letters. And I think that's where you find me.
That's brilliant. Adam, I'd love to ask you to come back and do an episode just on loneliness and exploring, the power of friendship, which we've not covered today. So I will, I'll hope to invite you back to do that. But for now, thank you, Adam. That's been fantastic, brilliant conversation with you today. Thank you.
Well, I hope you'll invite me out to England for a pint and we'll be able to talk even more deeply.
Absolutely. Thank you, Adam.
Great to meet you, Philip.
Thank you for listening to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. If you want to find out more about Adam, visit his website, dradamdorsay.com. It's Dorsay. Adam's TEDx talks are both available on YouTube. Just search on his name. One is called Friendships in Adulthood, and the other is called Emotions, the Data Men Miss. Adam's book, Super Psyched, Unleash the Power of the 4 Types of Connection and Live the Life You Love is available to buy on Amazon. If you've got a story to tell you think your experience would help others, then please do get in contact, either via the website, mid-lifemen.com, or email me at midlifemen01@gmail.com. If you've enjoyed listening, please do rate and review the podcast. It really does help raise its profile, and together we can reach more people who might benefit from the stories shared by my guests. Finally, there's now a book out called Men Speak Up, A Journey Through Mental Health, which is based on the podcast, and it's available on Amazon and other retailers.